the effectiveness principles and puts partner countries' ownership and alignment at the forefront of its programming. With no further ado, I give the floor now to Mr. Stocchiero to present the CONCORD's finding. Thanks again for being here to you all.
Thank you. It seems that it's not working, the PowerPoint. However, obviously,
Puoi iniziare senza intanto io mi
So, thanks to everybody for coming here to this presentation. And I will present the preliminary findings in the sense that in the next weeks we are trying to finalize the complete report. But we are able now to present you the main important conclusions and findings of our work. It has been a collective work in the sense that through the migration group of CONCORD Europe, we have involved a lot of NGOs, civil society organizations, not only here in Brussels, but also in the several member countries of European Union, and obviously in African countries. Also this one.
I've been 3 years in the parliament and it's always like that. It's incredible.
Not only here.
Yeah, okay.
Technical problems are, I think, everywhere practically. However, and why it's important for us to present these conclusions and preliminary findings now? Because as has been said before, 2 years from the launching of the European Trust Fund just now in November. So after 2 years, I think that we can make a sort of state of art of the implementation of the Trust Fund. And the other point is that in the next week there will be the summit between African countries and European Union, Abidjan. And so it's important for us to present our conclusion, considering also, especially the next political meeting. And there are several papers and articles, position papers on the European Trust Fund. And as CONCORD Europe, we thought that it was important also this collective exercise, taking stock of all the analyses that have been done in the last 2 years. So we have done a desk analysis, a deep desk analysis of all what has been produced before. And surely it's very important for CONCORD Europe because of the political relevance of migration issues on development policies. You know that migration crisis has touched deeply the practice and the policies of development actors in African countries and not only there. And the other point is that we are very worried about human rights. And human rights are the basic of our development policies and also the European Union development policies. And you know that also in the last weeks, in the last months, there are informations that give us the impression, and not only the impression, but the facts that human rights are not respected. And the problem is to understand if European policies and if the European Trust Fund is an instrument that can have negative consequences on human rights, and especially of human rights of migrants. And here there are some preliminary findings. The objectives of our report. We have identified some main questions. The first one is about the problem, the possibility of diversion of ODA funds from development to other aims, migration management, so a diversion and instrumentalization of development funding. The second question is about the partnership and the conditionalities with African countries. The third question is about the implementation or not of effectiveness principles and the policy coherence for development. And then the last questions, what are the consequences for human rights, but also for local stability and local development in African countries of the implementation of the trust fund. Our methodology was more a qualitative methodology in the sense that we have done a desk analysis of the strategy and projects and programs of the trust fund in African countries in connection with the new partnership framework, because obviously we think that there is a direct link between the policy, the new partnership, and the use of development funding through the trust fund. First of all, we have done a traffic light analysis in the sense that we have considered all the projects in all the countries covered by the trust fund, but we have identified the riskier projects, in the sense the projects that may present diversions of funds. And we have seen that all the projects implemented by the trust funds follows the different priorities of the trust funds, root causes, but not only root causes, migration management, security, and protection, return and readmissions. And considering all the projects, we have identified 3 cases where diversion problems may be present. And these 3 cases are for Libya, Niger, and Ethiopia. 1 country for each window of the trust fund: Libya for the North Africa window, Niger for the Sahel window, and then Ethiopia for the Horn of Africa window. I would like to say that the great majority of projects financed by the trust fund are focused on root causes. And so in this sense, they don't represent a problem of diversion for development funding through the trust fund. But in especially 2 cases, Niger and Libya, there are problems of diversions, as we will see with the next slides and reflections. And so we have done interviews on the field in Niger, Libya, Ethiopia, but we have thought that it was very important to involve also our member countries, because you know that one specific novelty of the trust fund is to mix funds of the European Union with funds coming from European member countries. And so we focused our interviews in 4 countries: in Italy, because it is the main contributor to the trust fund, and Germany, France, and Spain. And what we can say is that we have collected a lot of information, but especially in an anonymity form. So a first point is a kind of reticence that we have found in doing interviews in our countries and in African countries, especially in institutions. So a short reminder of the background. You know that I was born in 2015 with the so-called migration crisis that for us in CONCORD Europe is not a migration crisis, but a solidarity crisis. There has been an important political evolution in framing new policies and new instruments. So we had the European Agenda on Migration, and then the La Valletta Plan, the EU-Turkey Agreement, the Partnership Framework, and the creation of this flexible instrument that is the European Trust Fund for the implementation of the La Valletta Plan. And this trust fund mixes different objectives that are development and security, border and migration management. In the same time, we have not to forget the political push that came to our leaders from public opinion opposition to migrant reception, to the increasing political weight of nationalist parties. And this is the context, the political context of the trust fund. And so it was born a political expectation about the trust fund, a political expectation about the role that the trust fund can have in stemming irregular migration, focusing on root causes and migration management. But as we know, this kind of approach, of political approach to development funding is an instrumentalization of the official development assistance to other means that are not human rights or eradication of poverty. And more important is putting at risk fundamental values of the European construction. So it's not only a problem of ODA, of development funding, but it's a deeper problem for the construction of the European Union. Finally, a data that is very important for us, that is according to the last data, October 2017, 90% of the trust fund is coming from ODA, that are not only the European Development Fund, the majority of funds come from the European Development Funds, but also from the Development Cooperation Instrument and the European Neighborhood Instrument. 90% is development funding. So what are the main findings? First of all, we have to understand that the trust fund is part of a more general trend towards an increasing flexibility in using development fundings for European strategic aims. So the trust fund is part of the new partnership framework, but we have not to forget the global strategy for the European Union foreign and security policy that is asking to development to be more flexible and to mix with other strategic interests of the European Union. What it means for us is that in this sense, we are going toward less for development use of funding and more or other means. What is this mix? There is not clarity about. And that's why it's very important to focus our attention in the trust fund, because it allows us to understand if it's true that development funding is diverted or not. And so, as I said before, we have found diversion of development funding in the case of Niger and Libya, not, for example, in the case of Ethiopia. The great majority of trust fund expenses are on root causes development projects. There is a big project on migration management, but we have seen their activities, and it appears that there are not problems in the sense of respect of human rights. So the case of Ethiopia is, for us, a good case for the implementation of the trust fund. But we cannot say the same in the case of Niger and Libya, because in these countries, there is an increasing shift towards migration and border management. And so in these cases, we find diversion of funds, but also the reduction of effectiveness and partnership principles, because projects are not decided and have not an ownership of local government. They don't involve civil society, local civil society organizations, and some conditionalities are attached. In this sense, I can remember, for example, the budget sustained to the government of Niger, that are 80 million euros of budget support and a great volume of development funding that is aimed to migration management and border controls, sustaining local government, policy units, creation of reception centers for migrants. And this aid is attached to different conditionalities about the real implementation of new national strategies on in fighting smuggling and trafficking. And then, considering the policy coherence for development, we may say that there is a coherence in reverse, in the sense that it's not policy coherence for development, but it's a policy coherence for migration management. But what is more important for us are the consequences. And in some cases, the consequences are tragedies, because migrants are compelled to find riskier routes, especially going from Niger to Libya. In the case of Libya, we have found a new industry that is not on smuggling, but is on detention, that are militias are managing detention centers, and they obviously are not respecting human rights, as you know from different information that we have. And this is representing a new space for militias in order to be legitimized at institutional level. Another consequence is that there are limits to positive economic migration in the regional context, especially in the case of Niger, because the repression measures that have been put in place, for example, in the region of Agadez, it's true that they are reducing smuggling, but they are causing also mobility problems to migrants that want to migrate in Niger or in different countries in the area of Sahel. And then another important consequences that we have to take into consideration is that some projects are increasing instability and are causing popular local discontent on new policies. In October 2017, there has been a new study of the Netherlands Institute for International Relationship, the Klingel Health Institute, that has presented the data on how much local population are considering projects supported by the European Union as projects that are not solving their problems, but they are against their possibility to improve their lives, also because the economic alternatives that are sustained with some projects have not impact or are really insufficient, while in the same time the security measures are just in time, are just producing effects on local populations. And then, as I said, support to protection economic alternatives are clearly not sufficient to counterbalance the security measures. At the end, considering the governance of the trust fund, we have found that local civil society organizations are marginalized in the sense that are not involved in the formulation of ideas of projects, or not involved at least in considering what are their opinions. They are not consulted, but only after that the projects are financed. And in the driving seats of development funding with the trust fund are agencies of member states. And finally, as we have said in the last Aid Watch report, but also in a specific new report of CONCORD Europe on impact assessment, in the case of the new partnership framework and the trust fund, there is no impact assessment at all, not before and not after the implementation of the projects. So, what are our recommendations? First of all, the need to mainstream human rights, but not as ancillary activities in security projects, but as the basic approach also for a security for security activities, for security projects. So the security concerns human security and not a national security of or a security of European countries in stopping migration. And in this sense, it's what we ask strongly is to stop the support to the Libyan Coast Guard. Second, to prevent the diversion of ODA from the main objective of poverty eradication. As I said before, especially in the case of Libya and Niger, because in the other countries we have seen that there is not such a risk of diversion. And then the respect of the principles of developing effectiveness, and more support to increase the community resilience with the participation of local civil society organizations and NGOs. And then to stop conditionality on aid, for migration control objectives. Also in the case, we have seen that especially Niger is a point. And then there is the need to, I think, altogether to redefine a current approach to migration development nexus. Because I remember the communications of the European Commission's on the global approach on migration and mobilities of 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and according to my view, they were very good communications in the sense that they were focused on the potential of migrants for development, the positive aspect of migration. But all has changed after 2015 with this regressive approach on development funding on migration policies. So what we ask is to reframe the migration development nexus according to the Agenda 2030. Because the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, are the main framework for development funding. Then reform the governance of the trust funds in the sense that we need clear criteria, because also doing interviews in the different countries, we have seen that there are not so a strong framework considering criteria, results for development funding, and improve the civil society organization participation in the governance, and giving more voice to European Parliament. We know that it's beginning the negotiation of the multi-annual financial framework, and in this framework, the trust fund instrument is considered as an instrument that could be very important in the future. So it's necessary to taking stock of the main lessons about what has worked and what has not worked with the trust fund in order to improve the negotiation of the multi-financial framework. And last but not least, what all the civil society organizations are asking in these years, that are more regular routes. And you know that also in the La Valletta plan, there is a priority on mobility and regular channels. But this priority is not supported, as we know. And also the financing of the trust fund for mobility and regular roads are the less financed. And so in this case, we need a more ambitious resettlement framework, more options for family reunification, but also for economic migrants, not only high-skilled migrants, but also low-skilled migrants. And then for the next future, it's very important to reframe the new partnership framework, considering the negotiation of the Global Compact on Migration and Refugees that will take place in the next months. And at the end of the next year, there will be a decision at the level of the UN Assembly. And the next months are very important, are very relevant in order to reframe the migration policies of the European Union, of the member countries, giving more space to regular routes. In this sense, we can hope to reduce the smuggling and trafficking industry, not only with repressive measures, but also with positive measures for respecting human rights and for the development of our companions of African countries. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Andrea, for the very interesting findings. I welcome also, now I don't see her anymore, but Cecile Tianghi, another colleague who will be in Abidjan, was just there. And I let me just say before giving the floor to the Commission that it shows very well what you said. What we are fighting, we have been fighting in this Parliament for a while. It's, I think, shameful that the Council at the moment can only find agreement on externalization of our borders and responsibility. And it seems to be not capable at all to find any agreement on internal solidarity, on safe and legal ways, for real, and also on an equal sharing of responsibility at the EU level. So the point is, you mentioned the Libyan Coast Guard. Let me remind you, some of you already know, on the 6th of November, there was another tragedy in the Mediterranean. And the Libyan Coast Guard was preventing a search and rescue operation done by Sea-Watch, during which 5 people lost their lives. And among them, a small boy of, I think, 4 years old. It's clear that the Libyan Coast Guard is taking our money and not changing their attitude. They were throwing potatoes at the volunteers of the Sea-Watch. They were preventing some people from jumping towards their family members that were already on the boat of Sea-Watch. And when they saw that these people were trying to reach their families, they started the engine and they left without noticing that there was a man holding on a rope that was attached to their boat, and he died out of that. So this is the situation in the Mediterranean. I really agree with the idea of stopping this cooperation, which is nonsense and is impacting heavily human rights of people there. And just lastly, to give some more food for thought, what is, I think, worrying about this new nexus between migration and development is that in this way I have the impression that we are hampering our relationship with the African partners and pushing them towards other interlocutors that are not asking for any conditionality, not even the one of human rights. And this is clearly happening in Africa more and more. The second point is that by trying to put in place in Africa measures to respond to the securitarian obsessions of some EU governments, we are also focusing only on the countries that are on the routes that are towards Europe, but at the same time maybe forgetting some least developed countries that need our support. And last but not least, the point is also that, as you said, for Niger, and we also had a discussion with the Commission and with some NGOs in the working group on migration and development committee, the picture clearly tells us that there is a risk to, in a way, impact on the mid and long term the African economies by trying to address just a small part of migration flows that are directed towards Europe. But most of migration is infra-regional migration, according to the freedom of movement in the region, which is crucial for their economies, for the African economies. So with this kind of measure, we are risking to have an impact that even if it's not willing to do it, it can risk to make things worse and to create more inequalities and more poverty and less opportunities for young Africans. So these are the main point of reflection on which I'm happy to have a discussion that we are also having in the more institutional framework of the working group with the Commission, that I really thank for being here and sharing and exchanging their views with us. So I will directly give the floor to Didier Verset. Thanks for coming, and we hope all that Carla Montesi will be healthy back soon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank a lot to the NGOs communities to steer the scrutiny. It's very important for the European Commission that you are able to do it and that you are doing this. And of course, your recommendation is very important for us to improve ourselves and to have a great dialogue with the partner countries, but but also with our colleague and friends from the Council and for our delegation. What I propose, I'm coming to have some comments on your main pillars of comment, and then to give some examples. Of course, you have done a deep desk analysis with some interviews. I would like to come on some facts, and I would like to have some concrete results of the EU Trust Fund. And but first, of course, what we are speaking about is not the same in the Horn of Africa, in West Africa, and in Libya, or in the North Africa. Meaning that it's not, in fact, so easy to compare what we are doing in Horn or in West Africa, or especially in the North of Africa. Of course, in the Horn of Africa, and my colleague from Ethiopia can explain better than me, but it's a refugee crisis, and internal refugee crisis, if I can say, in the West Africa and in North Africa. It's irregular migration crisis, and it's quite different. But before to go to this kind of detail, I would like to remind that is not a migration EU Trust Fund. Okay, it's not a thematic migration EU Trust Fund. A lot of people forget that the first word is for stability. It's an emergency EU Trust Fund for stability, meaning, and especially in West Africa, a first objective is to maintain the stability in the region. And based on the Sahel strategy that you know, the EU Sahel strategy, meaning to do the nexus between the security and the development. And of course, in this context, migration is an issue, but it's not the only issue that we want to address with the EU Trust Fund in the Sahel. Now, on the mainstream human rights into all action, of course, it's a big priority of the EU, and a great number of EU Trust Fund programs actually address human rights violation. Other thing is that the protection and the promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms are the core of our relation with all the third countries, and addressed through our dialogue with government and through target development assistance aimed at protecting human rights of the population. And I will take the example of Niger. Of course, we are fighting, and we help the government. And you know, when you speak about ownership, I mean that the budget support is the best ownership instrument. You know, there is no agency, no operator. The operator is the government. And we work with the government, of course, to have a migration policy. Okay, you said it's a conditionality. I will come back on the mechanism of the budget support, because it's not a conditionality on terms of a conditionality for the EU Trust Fund or something like that. It's results indicators with the government, and we think it's important for government, a transit country as Niger, to have a migration policy. But we work with the government not to accept people on the ground, trafficker who don't respect the human rights. We have to fight against trafficker who is going to put people in jail, who is going to sell people to other trafficker to Libya. I think that when you do development, when you working with a Niger country like Niger, it's a normal dialogue to explain, and that it's a problem of justice, of state building, of police. It's not a problem of military, I mean, of army. It's a problem of rule of law. And then it's normal to discuss with them to say, what are you doing with your trafficker in the north of Niger? And sometimes, as you know, it's the population in sometimes. Sometimes it's people, and I was in the north of Niger, there are people coming from the local authorities. We have to be frank. what are you doing with this? Because it's local authorities who are not doing something, and you accept that human rights, they are not respected in the north of Nigeria. There are no rule of law with them, and we have some results to arrest a trafficker, to put trafficker in jail. And for me today, and that is an issue, is to respect the human rights of the trafficker, because of course they have the right to have human rights. That is an issue, and that we can discuss, and that has to be the next discussion with the government, to be sure that they respect the human right for the trafficker. And in Mali, if you go to Mali, of course, we are working with them on the stability, and we are working with them that they need to arrest terrorists, and of course, terrorists, they have the right to have human rights. But the point is that clear, we address this trafficking and the human right, the not respect of the human right by the trafficker, and it's sure that the consequence, and I fully share your point, that today it's more difficult if you want to do irregular migration. It's more difficult, more expensive, and more risky than before. That's for sure. But it's a consequence that we arrest trafficker, and well, we can discuss a lot, but now, and I will come back on this, we need to work with the government, and as you said, there is a free mobility in West Africa. We have to work with them on the mobility and the free mobility and the regular migration, and also to Europe. And I will come back on the Erasmus program, etc. But it's another thing, and we need to address. And maybe it's not enough, I think, in your presentation, address that we should work, I think, on the regular mobility. That is for the human rights. But to be honest, in all of our action, or the majority, human rights, as a European civil servant, it's in my ADN. And when we are working with our delegation and the delegation on the ground, of course, it's an important issue, and we want to address this. Now, to prevent the diversion of the ODA from its main objective of poverty eradication, as you said, main of what we are doing is about root causes of migration, but in fact it's about root causes of poverty. There is a clear link on this. Just remember that 25% are going to the economic and employment opportunities. It's quite the same, more, 30% to the resilience. Then more than 50% are clearly to the poverty eradication, if I can say. 25% are going to improving migration management. I will come back on this on the IOM big partnership that we have with them, and I will come back on this on the concrete result from yesterday and today. And 20% is going to improvement of governance. Of course, you can say that in this context there are some security action on the border management, but we think that we need to do it to have a rule of law, to have a correct justice, right justice, respected the human rights. And just remember in Niger again, the budget support, it's a budget support for justice, and not only for the police, but police it's a part of the justice, as you know. Then for the ODA, of course, 10%, as you said, is not money coming from the ODA, but for us, for the moment, 100% on what we are doing, it's an ODA perspective. I mean, we don't consider that we have some action which are not ODA, and as already said, 55% of what we are doing are clearly on poverty eradication, for access to basic services, health, education, for security and social protection. Coming back to Niger again, what I would like to say that it's what we are doing on the EU Trust. Behind this, with the government, we have a major budget support on food security and agriculture, about 260 million euros. that don't see the EU Trust Fund as the only instrument that we use in a fragile country like Niger to address the root causes of the poverty. Of course, it's one of the instruments, but it's not the only one. Now, to respect the development effectiveness principle and increase the community resilience, of course, we have a lot of resilience, projects, and it's true that we target, as said, on Africa, we target the refugees areas and the refugees population, but also the community living around this kind of refugees. In the West Africa, it's the same. When we do a project, and that is the case in Niger, when we are doing a project for the migrant, or we try to have protection of the migrant, but we want also to give dividends of fighting against trafficker for the local population. We have main projects in Agadez, for instance. I cannot listen to the population saying that, okay, the money is not coming fast, etc., etc. It's true, because in Agadez we want to do a good job with GIZ and Agence Française de Développement in this case, and the ask to have a quite long period of identification, formulation, and an assessment before to do big infrastructure. That is another subject. Okay, are we fast enough or not? But in this case, the reaction was clearly to have a full development project for longer. Now, following the information that I received from AFD and GIZ, they are working in the need assessment with the local communities, also with the local authorities, but mainly with the local communities to have this assessment. Of course, for the population, is not quick enough. Okay, point taken. We have to improve the time between the contract and the first implementation. But if you are too quick, we could do just emergency or humanitarian aid without the development view. And that is a big challenge for this trust fund, to be honest. To say that we are going to use development money to do something for a long time, but we want to do this quick. That is a challenge. It's very interesting because we discussed with the biggest agencies, member states, and in fact, we are changing their paradigm. Because as you know, they are development, bank, etc. It's difficult for them to say, okay, we need to create jobs in this country, but we don't have 3 years to analyze and to do a need assessment. We would like to do this now because there is a urge need to do it now. That is a change of paradigm. And that is this EU Trust Fund is changing is in the ODA community, because not only for the main agencies, because for your information, there is for the moment also a performance audit from the Court of Auditor of the EU, and it is the big challenge, because first I need an assessment of 2 years. Yes, nice, but then you are not quick to deliver what the population needs. That is the big discussion, and I think that this is trust fund has the big merit to discuss about it. Now, about the implementer, the member state agency is only 40%. Okay, then 23% is for NGOs, and 26% is for the UN, and the rest is some budget support and some service contract, etc. But when we speak that 40% is from member states agency, at the end, I'm sure that on the half of this figure, that means 20%, will be also for the NGOs. But in fact, at the end, on the ground, we will see, but I'm sure that if we have the same analysis, and I hope that you will do the same analysis in 2 years, more than 50% of the EU Trust Fund will be implemented by NGOs. Now, coming on your point on the conditionality, I said on the budget support, I think that we have to be very prudent. For me, it's not a total conditionality, and the Commission has always been very clear on the fact that applying negative conditionality on development funding linked to migration is not an effective approach. It's clear. We have to be more positive, and we have to work with government working on this issue. And in fact, I fully agree with you in when you speak about migration. In fact, quickly we speak about human rights. Why about the human rights in your country? And I would like to say also a concrete result today on this issue. It's on Ivory Coast. As you know, 2 days ago, one of the 55 Ivorians has been coming back from Libya, and they were in the terrible jails in the Zouara in Libya. They're coming back to Ivory Coast, and they are taken in charge from the airport by the EU Trust Fund, by the partnership with the IOM. This EU Trust Fund, what we are doing, we have saving people, and it's in the one of the 55, there are 89 women. Then it's clearly for the fragile people in first, and in the 89 women, there are 19 pregnant women. Okay, and that is a result of the EU Trust Fund. We are able to take back people from the jail with the IOM partnership. We are taken to take back women and men from the jail in Libya and to come back to Ivory Coast. And that is the first flight. And today there is another flight with 200 migrants in jail in Libya. Okay, that is for me clearly a protection, and more than a protection of returnees and reintegration of citizens. To be clear also, jail in Libya are not creating, is not the causes of the EU Trust Fund. It was there before, and we, as a Commission, we cannot accept that the EU Trust Fund create or is the causes of jail in Libya. Now we need to help people in the jails to come back in their origin countries and to be reintegrated. And what we are doing, of course, they are accompanied to receive assistance, and not only an assistance for 1 or 2 or 3 days, but clearly to receive assistance to be reintegrated in their community if they want, or to stay in the big city to find a job. Now, on the reform of the governance of the EU Trust Fund, I would like to repeat that the EU Trust Fund for Africa applies a bottom-up approach for identification and formulation of project proposals. Of course, we have some big initiative as the IOM initiative, but that was the initiative. Now, after that, the approach is coming from the ground. If I come back to this Ivory Coast story, it's not decided in Brussels or decided, I don't know, in Rome. It's decided between Libya and between Abidjan with the IOM colleagues and with the delegation, the EU delegation was there to assist at the coming back of the migrants. Once the proposal coming from the ground have been identified, they are shared with the headquarters for the technical review. Okay? And what is important is to be sure, and when we speak about criteria, what we ensure is that
the project are in line with the strategy decided on the strategic framework, and that was approved by the relevant operational committee and confirmed by the board of the trust fund. And we decide that the project respects this, if you say criteria, for us is they respect the strategy, in fact, of the window of the trust fund. Then there is a formal approval of those new programs to the operational committee. And the monitoring mechanism, say that there is nothing. We can discuss a lot of what is a good monitoring, and we can of course improve. But for the trust fund, is the first instrument where we have decided 19 indicators. That means limited indicators common to all of the projects, and then we can and we will be able, for once, to report what we are doing on the same basis for the 3 windows, and that is a big progress. As you know, the result-oriented approach is a difficult approach. We can see this on the ODA, etc., etc. But in this project, from the level, the ground level to the macro level, we want to follow a same matrix of indicators, and that is very important. On the transparency, because transparency word it's an important wording in the financial regulation. Then when we speak about transparency, we speak about to be transparent on the figures and the budget and the accounting, if I can say. And to be honest, for us, we are clearly transparent, and we assure this full transparency. The trust fund has decided to use the publicity available on Agro, really simple reporting platform, to present on a regular basis what we are doing based on results, based on financing situation, etc., etc. You can try to find this kind of transparency on the EDF or in the DCI, but good luck, it's not so. Voilà, I'm open to a lot of questions. Thanks a lot for the comments. We share that human rights is very important, and we want to work on it. And clearly, protection is a big point, but also we want to fight traffickers who don't respect the human rights, and that is also very important. I don't know if my colleague from Libya and Ethiopia or Niger.
Well, maybe I can add something. Most has been said, but from my point of view, from North Africa point of view, just a few words. Thank you, Ellie, and thank you, CONCORD, for this report. I concur that it's very useful to have this kind of interactions. We welcome always views and also criticism when it is constructive. But it's also good that you help us not only in let's say analyze the situation, but try also to put our acts together. And it is not easy, and we're trying to do our best. I also concur on the issue of the narrative. It's important that we move to a different way of narrative. Ellie, you mentioned the word emergency. Well, yeah, maybe we can convey more a sense of rapidity rather than emergency. And when we talk about crisis, yes and no, in the sense that migration is not a phenomenon that is born today and will finish tomorrow, and we cannot stop migration, as you correctly said. But it's a natural phenomenon that will continue. And well, I don't know how many Belgians are here in the room, but we are all migrants, and I'm Italian, and we are a population of migrants. So migration is a natural phenomenon that must be managed. And I agree, we need also to increase the narrative on positive migration and talk about legal channel of migration. And by the way, also make the population aware that regular migration by far is by far bigger than irregular migration into the EU, and also the part that plays horizontal migration in Africa. On the more specifically on, well, there is of course a political EU context that is unavoidable, and that the kind of actions that we do interplays with the political context we have in Europe, and that is something we need to take into account. But we know migration is always at the top of any political campaign that has been taking place in the past 2 years, and certainly will be in the next political campaign in Italy. So we're aware of that, and we are aware of the risks of that. Coming back on more specifically on Libya and what we're doing in North Africa. It's not that there is a diversion of funds from development into security concerns, but we think that when we address a situation like Libya and certain other countries of North Africa, doing stabilization and development work means addressing a number of issues, and we think 3 dimensions that we need to address in parallel are the following. One is, of course, first and foremost, the protection and assistance of the migrants, migrants, refugees, internally displaced persons, and returnees, and all the human rights issues that go along that. But also in parallel, we do economic development and stabilization efforts that are pretty complex, I must say, because the country is a mess, and we need to try to intervene, and there is little access, and it's very difficult. But we're increasing our efforts in that respect. We are setting up a big project for local communities and municipalities, and perhaps we should increase the kind of interaction and meetings we have on not only on what we've done, but also on what we plan to do. And then part of it is of course also border management and fight against human smuggling. We think that those 3 dimensions go along together. We need to fight the human smuggling. At the same time, we need to create alternative economies, because the human smuggling is the major economy in Libya right now. And then, at the same time, and first and foremost, we tackle the human rights dimension. Didier has already explained that the situation of detention centers in Libya is nothing new. It's something we deplore, and we think it's terrible. At the same time, it's not the result of the EU action, but on the contrary, as EU, we have had the courage to act and to try to address the situation. But it's not easy, and we also need your help, not only in monitoring and analyzing the situation, because there is a lot of awareness. Everybody knows. I mean, there is documentaries on the situation in Libya, but we need to try to find a way to address it, and we work on protection issues with UN organizations, NGOs, and our first major program on protection in Libya was adopted in April. 90 million. We are working with the IOM, the UNHCR, UNDP, UNICEF, GZ. We're starting to work with Italy, and we're working with a number of NGOs, the Danish Refugee Council, Save the Children, CHESV, International Rescue Committee, and so on and so forth. But so the issue is not our commitment or our efforts to protect human rights and to address this situation, but it's how we go about it and how we increase access of humanitarian actors in Libya. We know it's difficult, but we're also thinking on what are the strategies, and we raise it with the Libyans all the time. What are the strategies in order to increase access? And we think that if we play on the three dimensions, border management, development, and protection, we have better chance to get the Libyans on board and address the issue of access of humanitarian actors. And the moment we have increased access of humanitarian actors, then we can try to change the situation on the ground. It's very important we manage to go on the ground. Coming back on the numbers, Didier has mentioned what happened yesterday and today, but I can say from the beginning of the year, thanks to our program, we have supported humanitarian voluntary repatriations from Libya in the number of 5,000 people, and we have provided assistance, medical assistance to migrants in dire conditions in Libya in the number of about 4,000 since we had started the program in April. So the numbers and the results are impressive in spite of the incredible difficulties we have of access in Libya. Then a few last points, if you allow me, on the Libyan Coast Guard. I understand the concern. We have also seen the videos. We have the news. We have seen what happened with that episode with the Libyan Coast Guard. At the same time, we don't have much alternatives. We cannot intervene in Libyan territorial waters. I don't know if anybody here can do that. And the only thing we can do is to try to build a relationship with the Libyan Coast Guard and try to monitor as much as possible. And everybody here at the table is welcome to help us to monitor what the Libyans do and what the Libyan Coast Guard do. But we the rationale behind our support to the Libyan Coast Guard is saving lives, and that's the only way we can do it in Libyan territorial water. Another thing on the new program we have designed with Italian on border management, we are very careful and very cautious on giving them equipment for border management. We are putting that on the table as a sort of conditions. Okay, we come and help you on border management, but from your side, we need to change something in terms of treatment of migrants. That is our strong point of realpolitik and leverage. So to conclude, thank you very much for all the analysis and the comments. I think they're always very welcome. Message from my side: it's good to analyze and to report, but it's also important that we try to act. Certain countries in the region and the migration phenomenon in general, the development issues, situation in Libya, everything is a puzzle. And when you try to solve the puzzle, you start by putting the angles, and then you look at various colors in the puzzle. You find some green, you find some blue, and then you try to put the puzzle together. Maybe you make some mistakes in the beginning, but at least you try to solve the puzzle. If you don't start, then you never solve it.
Thanks to the Commission for their contribution. I will directly give the floor to any one of you who She had many questions at the moment, but starting from my colleague Malin Björk.
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you, Eli, thank you for the study and the Commission's responses to that. I work in the Libya committee with Eli and Judith that had to leave also, and we know that this is not what we hear in that committee. You know, we have EAS coming, we have DG Justice coming, speaking about migration control and management and security, and it's very clear from their side that all means should be mobilized in order to you know, control migration and stem the flows. So that is very clear language from their side, and I appreciate that you don't have that kind of language, and I appreciate your speaking about that conditionality is not part of your agenda. But it's clearly part of other parts of the Commission's agenda. So that, I think that is a problem in itself. I must also say that I invite you to maybe you have already taken part of the report that was adopted by the European Parliament on resettlement regulation, where we rejected, a big majority in this Parliament rejected the notion of conditionality in that part, in that regulation, because that would be another means that they want to use to, you know, put pressure, and we do this, and like as like a carbon copy of the EU-Turkey deal. So so that I think is a positive thing, that this House has come with a strong message refusing conditionality in that context. But we do see that, you know, they speak about readmission agreements where they, you know, want to make that conditional. They want to use the visa codes to make people, countries agree to control migration and stem flows, etc. And so how do we resist that then? Because I think also the colleagues in CONCORD, it's extremely important. One of the most important instruments we have is to refuse that development aid is diverted. And this will be one of the biggest battles, because we do the other big battles on the visa code, on the readmission agreements, etc. But this is one of the big battles, and we have to do it also at national level, I think, with our individual government. Why should Sweden, my country, put money in an EU trust fund that financed the Libyan Coast Guard? And I completely disagree with, it's not an incident. Where else can we get away with funding somebody that actively contributed to the death of people at sea? Money talks, cancel the funding. That's how we also create change in that sense. So I think so we have to have this discussion at the EU level, but also with our national governments. If it's being used for poverty eradication, for improving local governance, etc., etc., that, you know, we should you know, trust the EU to manage these funds. If not, I don't see why I, as a you know, Swedish parliamentarian, should actually go home and argue for pitching in money at this level. So, but I do think the development funding is one of our areas of resistance toward this changing of framework, and where some forces want to move away from it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Next question. Anyone of you?
Giulia Ponte from CONCORD TV. So I'd like to react on a couple of points on the issue of national conditionalities in and I want to do it based on interviews we carried out on the ground. So based on what we have been told on the ground in Niger. We carried out interviews with European member state embassies in Niger, and according to them, part of in particular, with reference to the support project in Niger, they were saying that actually part of the funding, of the next part of the funding, will be dependent on a set of conditions, including the drafting of a national strategy against irregular migration before June 2017, a national security strategy before September 2017, the purchase of security equipment with enhanced border control, the rehabilitation of construction of border posts in strategic areas, the creation of special border police units, and the construction of migrant reception centers. And that if certain results are not achieved, Nigerian authorities can face financial penalties on the following installments. So when we take and accept what you say about conditionalities and the fact that ODA is not subject to conditionalities, what is part of the narrative here in Brussels seems to be very different from what's actually negotiated on the ground. The other point is I wanted to articulate it a little bit more how you think that this project, so the chosen 80 million project, where Italian government also is putting a lot of money together with the trust fund, and in addition the 46 million project in Libya, how these projects, which are funded by ODA, can be considered ODA according to OCSEDAC rules, which are, by the way, evolving and are starting to be more precise by certain aspects.
Thanks, Julie. Next question.
My question is on trust funds as a whole. So you're saying it can't be as fast because actually we need a proper assessment and we do need to talk with various parties, and we fully agree. So the question is, do you really need it? If it's not fast, if it's not as consulted as normal development programming, if there are plenty of problems with human rights abuses, for example, when it comes to Libya, do you then really need them as a tool, or do you need more flexibility of the existing instruments? Because we see if there is a political will to be more flexible, like it is possible with the current instruments. Look at Syria, for example. Thanks.
Next.
I'm a political advisor from the WNGL group. My name is Anna Back. We've been, with many of our members, to different countries to look, at the criminalization of borders. And one of our last missions was Sudan. We met with some of your colleagues to discuss the findings of our report that they saw very controversial. I would like to have questions because CONCORD raised, some countries of trust funds, and when we went to Sudan, we realized that the most sensitive trust fund projects were regional projects, like the BMM and LOX. So if you could maybe talk about these ones as well, because they focus specifically on migration management and fight against trafficking and border control. That's in this project that we realized that some equipment could be given to some very sensitive countries like Eritrea as well, and Sudan. So because for these two countries it's hard to show that we are giving funding, and we have the issue of giving funding to the government, which we can't. So the strategy is going through, the UN or the Italian government who is leading in Sudan. So if you could just explain about these two projects, how they've been developing recently, that would be interesting, and if you've been providing equipment.
Thanks, Amanda. Next question, if any. Yes.
Rafael from Oxfam. Following up on the issue of flexibility, and specifically maybe on the regional projects, I think that when we looked into the trust fund, we see that flexibility is a major element there, and I appreciate the comment about having a bottom-up approach, but it seems that specifically on border management issues, bottom-up sometimes means government up rather than local community up, and it seems like there are many parts of the trust fund where you have localized projects working with NGOs, with local communities in order to develop their needs, and at the same time there's another hand that is working at a national or international level in a way that might undermine those local projects because there's not enough consultation, there's not enough risk analysis or conflict analysis, and I'm wondering where in the trust fund there is procedures that can make sure that those regional top projects and the community projects can contribute to each other. And as mentioned in the CONCORD report, I think that Libya is one of those extreme cases where you have the urgent, necessary protection projects with UNHCR, with IOM, and at the same time funding for the Coast Guard that finds every report that looks into the actions of the Coast Guard finds again and again that they're violating rights at sea, putting people at risk at sea, and then the ones that are intercepted, even outside the territorial water in the self-declared search and rescue zone, are taken back into detention. So how does those two approaches work together? Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions? Okay, there's one here.
Yeah, it's mainly a question on the future of the trust fund, of the EU Africa Trust Fund, but then also the other trust funds. I don't know if you could talk about that. The future, the MFF, how do you see it evolving?
Okay, thanks. Other questions, or we can start with the answers? Let's go on. Okay, so thanks for the question. I will just add one or two. In the framework of our working group on focusing on migration in the Development Committee, the reason why we needed to build up this structure within the Development Committee is that it's very, very difficult for us with this new financial instrument to keep the democratic scrutiny that we have and we should have. So we put together this framework to go deeper and to look at how development money is spent through these new instruments, not only the trust fund, of course, but mainly the trust fund in some of these countries. We had some, we had a focus on Niger and on Libya in particular until now. We'll have the next meeting today. But the point is, it's very difficult to understand what are these projects, because it's true that there is a website with the projects, but it's very difficult to understand what they mean concretely in the field and how they're funded and what is the aim and if there's any control of the results of these projects. So I'm making a point of transparency here. I mean, it's not enough to put a site and a list of projects in which it's very difficult to understand what's going on because they are explained in very vague terms. This is making our work as parliamentarians and yours as, of course, organization, non-governmental organization, much more difficult. The point is that the part of the trust fund takes money from many different sources, mainly the ODA. But for example, on the part which comes from DCI, we should have our full democratic scrutiny on how the money is used and if it's responding to the DAC criteria. So the point is that it's impossible for us, and we were discussing this with the Commission in that framework, it's impossible for us to understand because we are told, okay, part of that money is comes from DCI, so for the percentage of that money that comes from DCI, we ensure that the DACability is respected and the criteria are respected. But how can we monitor this if you're not able to tell us where the DCI money is going specifically? So I would really call on the Commission to try to be clearer on how the different sources are going to fund the projects right now. I know it's difficult, but still, otherwise, the Parliament is completely sidelined, and this cannot happen on such important matters. The last point is on what you said about the Libyan Coast Guard. I share the comment from the colleague from Oxfam. The point is that Libya was basically forced to have a search and rescue area that was not really there before. So I think that I really think that this cooperation with the Libyan Coast Guard is not guaranteeing a major change in the way they are operating in that part of the Mediterranean Sea. So probably in terms of being able to effectively do search and rescue operation, I have the impression that the situation was much better before they started to claim this search and rescue area in the part of the sea. But on voluntary return programs, of course, it's what you're trying to do, if I understand correctly, even through the trust fund, when you were talking about Ivory Coast. The point is, what options are there for people in need for international protection in those jails? Because in the lack of any safe and legal ways for these people to come to the European Union or to ask for international protection in Libya that has not even signed, as you know, the Geneva Convention, bringing them back cannot be the only option for them. Because otherwise, it's like, in a way, moving our frontiers to the south and also having non-refoulement, breaking the non-refoulement principles. Because, I mean, maybe some of these people need international protection and cannot go back to Ivory Coast, to Senegal, to Mali, to other countries where they have come from. Thanks. So I will start. What do you prefer? You will start with the. You want to comment, and we still have some.
If I can, I have only 1-2 comments. It says that I appreciate very your position, your ideas, your open mind, and considering this, I think that yes, you are right when you said that there is ownership in the direct budget support because it's the Niger government. No. But if you consider the political situation, obviously it was not the Niger government that 2 years ago was considering the priority to do something on migration management in Niger. It was a European priority. So probably it was an inducted ownership in the case of the Niger government. And the other point is obviously that, considering our point of view, it's more important not only the ownership of the government as such, but the possibility to involve also local society, local civil society organization. In this case, in Niger, you know that there is the cadre of concertation, but this framework of consultation, it's not working very well, according to the local interlocutors that we have interviewed in Niger. According to my view, it would be important to sustain also this kind of instrument, consultation, opportunities for local civil society organization to be heard at the local, national level. And the other point is that I agree that it's very difficult to mix the need to respond quick and here there is a problem of mismatching of a problem of policy sequencing, in the sense that you are implementing measures that have results in short term, but these kind of measures are more on the security field. While in the case of development and protection, there are problems. You need more time. It's not easy like in case of Libya. So there is a mismatch in the sequences of the different measures. And these problems goes against, unfortunately, to human rights of migrants, or also the possibility of local peoples to have economic alternatives to smuggling or this kind of industries. And then a final point about transparency, I agree that the platform, the website is very, very useful, and we have worked on this platform, on the documents that may be downloaded and so on. But what we mean for transparency is not only to see information after, but to understand before what is happening. And in this sense, in the interviews that we have done in different countries, there was some problems in the approach of the European delegations. Not all European delegations have done the same process involving local civil society organizations, NGOs, and so on. So there was not a homogeneous approach. If in the near future a more general and homogeneous approach could be implemented, better also for transparency. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks a lot. So we still have 9 minutes for the Commission to react, both the colleagues that are here.
Okay, very short. To go back on Niger and the budget support. What you have said, if I follow you, what you said, probably more than 50% of the EDF is not ODA, because that is the functioning of the budget support. In fact, we evaluate results and then we disperse. And that is not a conditionality. When we speak, I think, about conditionality on EU trust fund, we said, if you do progress on migration, then I give you money. Okay, that is my feeling that we speak about conditionality. It's not the case for the moment in the EU trust fund. Otherwise, we don't give money to Senegal, we don't give money to Mali, and if you look at the statistics, we give money, a lot of money to Senegal and a lot of money to Mali. Okay, if you compare to Niger, we agree that we have done good progress on migration with Niger, but they don't receive money because they have done good progress. If you compare with Mali and Senegal, where it's more difficult to have some progress, they receive also a lot of money. Then I repeat, when we give money to the country, there is no conditionality. Okay, that is very clear. Now, when we have a project of budget support, and maybe I can encourage you to follow, we have a very good training on budget support. We work on the policy, okay? Because that is the basis of the budget support, is to have and especially on sectorial budget support, as you said, we need a policy to support, okay? Now, you say that there is this policy because of the EU. You know, I know that you have a lot of power, but to be honest, Niger is a democratic country, and you know they do what they want. Also, then I'm sure that we are not so powerful to impose a policy in a country. But they develop their own, because to be honest, the migration flow was and is probably again, but was a big issue in Niger. And it's normal that they develop a policy for migration, like a policy for health, a policy for education, a policy. Then what we support is this policy development, and that is important for us before to disburse that this policy is accepted and voted by the parliament, etc., because we don't want to say, okay, I will support your reform policy or your rule of law, because speaking about ODA, there is an ODA on rule of law, and justice, police, etc., is clearly the rule of law. And don't forget that will be, don't worry, that will be the ODA. The ODA is rule of law, clearly. But we need first the policy, and then we need results. And when you speak about the building of the border security office in the desert, we have to. We could do it by ourselves. You know, we launch a tender procedure is what we do for some roads. To be clear, okay? We can ask to NGOs or to member states agency to do it, or you can decide that the best is to use the government, I mean the budget of the government. But then we don't pay as a pre-financing. First we need to see the result, and then we pay. Okay, and that is the approach of the budget report. Now we can discuss about the quality of the indicator, because that is an outcome indicator, is not an impact indicator. Okay, that we can discuss, but that is another discussion about the quality of the indicator of this budget report. But clearly for us is not a conditionality. It's the normal functioning of a budget report, and trust me, this budget report has been seen by all of the specialists and the experts of budget report, and we can discuss if it's better to have an impact or to have outcome. Okay, indicators. But that is the discussion, and I repeat, first to do a budget report, we need a policy, and this policy in this case was the migration and migration policy, and that is also for the money coming from Italy. On Niger, I will give the floor to my colleague about the civil society and the implication of the civil society. I will give also the floor to my colleague for the point on the south of Sudan, for Libya, just about do we need this tool? I don't know if the Parliament and the Council will give the same flexibility of this tool in all of you, or in all of the tools, because I'm from development. I think that in some time we need strong need assessment, we need strong analysis, etc. We need to program what we are doing, and we need to be, you know, in a less stress situation. If we decide that everything can be on this stress situation, okay, it's nice to open this door. I'm sure that we will accept to this opportunity, but I think that the programming is also an important part, because here we have no programming, we have a very short identification, very short formulation, and then we go to the ground. I think it's good to keep on a part of our money the normal way of programming, identification, formulation. Then, yes, I think that we need to keep the other tool. That means that we need this tool if we want to be faster than before. About the future of the EU Trust Fund, but it's the same. I mean, I suppose that we will continue. It's clearly a big discussion, in fact, not for us, but also for the UN and the World Bank, because the money that our member states or we are putting in this EU Trust Fund, respecting the EU policy, is the money that we don't put in the World Bank Trust Fund or in the UN Trust Fund, respecting not the EU policy, but more the world policy or the UN policy. That it's more a political decision. It's not on my level, but I think that the discussion is more, you know, we have to understand that no, we don't put the money, we put less money on the World Bank Trust Fund and the UN Trust Fund. On the democratic scrutiny, as you know, we invite the Parliament to the board. Unfortunately, the last board it was not possible, but I'm sure that in next board you will be present.
Yeah, maybe not on Friday, but sure.
Yeah, but there are 5 working days.
No, true, but you know that it's not only about sitting there at the board to have a transparency on the what is happening on the ground in this project. But I don't want to leave any take any more minutes to your colleague that might have a couple of things. We have 1 minute and a half. It's like being in the plenary.
Very briefly, on the question on do we need the instrument and do we reach the same people or not? We can reach with this instrument in Ethiopia. That's the second biggest refugee population, many in protected situation. With the EU Trust Fund, we can work on the development part of their situation together with the host communities, which is very difficult to do under the traditional EDF systems. On whether the border is only with the government, yes, of course we work with the BNN and we work with the government, but we also have the regional cross-border project where we work in a number of areas between Ethiopia and Sudan, Ethiopia and Kenya and South Sudan, where we in the border areas work on development projects, specifically dealing with the mobility of people and the economic development. On the question on the equipment that would or would not be bought for governments like Sudan and Eritrea, as of now, neither of the nor of the BBM any request has been made. So nothing has happened as yet. It is still ongoing. We haven't gotten requests for equipment. If we get these requests, the BBM will obviously scrutinize those requests to ensure that human rights principles are not violated, and of course it will also be in line with the sanctions that are in place. I think that's all for me.
I don't know if you want me to add anything on Libya and the Libyan Coast Guard. I understand it's very controversial. We don't deny that the functioning of the Libyan Coast Guard at the moment is not good. It's awful. We see it, but that doesn't mean that we just don't address the issue. When you have a problem, you try to address it. Saying that the Libyan Coast Guard is causing death rather than saving lives is a strong statement. I welcome any study that can be made that tell us what is the truth about the impact of the Libyan Coast Guard on the saving of lives. For the time being, what we're doing is basically only training, and for the time being only outside the trust fund. It's Sofia that is doing training. Now with the new action with the Italians, we will start doing training also under the trust fund. And with this new action, we have more capacity building for border management, for the Libyan Coast Guard, but also for the border guards in the south. But we have put in place very strong mechanisms for exceptional monitoring. And we have also set up in the program that we will want a third-party monitor, and we haven't yet found this third-party monitor that is willing to go down to Libya and to, in fact, monitor the situation on the ground. So I welcome any proposal from the table on who can help us actually monitoring what the Libyan Coast Guard is doing. Otherwise, we're pretty much ready to stop the funding if we're not able to guarantee the necessary conditions for our funds to be used in the proper way or to be diverted.
Okay, we have to
Yeah.
already here. Thanks a lot to every one of you, and let's keep in the conversation for the future.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Eddie, for having us.